This is module number 3, initiate the project. This is how we get a project going. This is how we begin a project. We're going to explore the steps required to start a project. We're going to explain some different requirements, requirements for the product that will produce as part of our project, and the requirements for management of the project. We're going to explore methods to determine requirements. We're going to understand a model called SMART, or the SMART model, and we'll discuss the value and content of a project charter. In this video, we're going to cover steps to start a project and the different requirements. There's sort of a process of how a project actually gets going. Sometimes it's formal, sometimes it's informal, but it kind of follows this sort of guideline that I'm going to present here. One is somebody has an idea or a need, and then what they do is they go through and there's an evaluation, a preliminary evaluation to see, is it a project or is it operations? If it's operations, then it goes and becomes an operational task and either gets assigned for somebody to do or it goes into the garbage can and we forget all about it. If it's a project, then somebody usually takes that project, so sort of requirements of what the project is about, return on investment, maybe a business case, and takes it to some sort of control committee, which then looks at that and evaluates that along with all the other submissions for projects and comes up with a prioritized list. If it's fortunate enough, it becomes a project initiative, and that's how a project gets going. Now, normally from the idea or need, but there's one more method of how a project gets going. Mandated tasks, for sometimes organizations are mandated by governments to perform things, and usually that doesn't follow the process. That basically goes straight over and becomes a project and goes from there. Now, the other side of this, if the project is not approved, then it basically gets scrapped and it goes back over to the garbage can. But the garbage can is usually a recycle bin and be prepared for people to take that project that was not approved and recycle it into something for the next cycle. And that's basically how a project gets going. Now that we know how a project gets going, let's look at some different requirements of that particular project. There are two different requirements. One is the requirements for the product that we're going to produce as part of our project, and there's the requirements for the management of the project itself. I like to look at the requirements, both from the product standpoint and from the project standpoint, as a book that has basically two chapters. One is the chapter of to create of what things we need in order to create the actual product that we're working on for our project. That's one chapter. And I look at the other side is the things that are required for us to manage that production of that product. We call that the management of the project itself. So those are two different requirements. We're going to explore each one of those in a little bit more detail. So looking at this in a little bit more detail, we can see on the left-hand side, we have the things that are required for us to manage the project itself. Things like assumptions, milestones, risks, external dependencies, the product charter, the stakeholder plan, risk plan, communication plan, work breakdown structure. Those are things that are relevant to tools and techniques that we use to help us manage the actual project. Whereas on the other side, when we look at the product, we look at something that has more dimension or color or weight. It's usually a tangible, sometimes an intangible thing, but a tangible thing, something that we can actually measure. We call that deliverable. So those are the two requirements. We look at what's required for us to run the project and what's required for us to actually create the product, which is what the project is all about. I like to have this little diagram here, is what I call the steps to success of running a project. And the very first step in this stairway to running the project is the product requirements. Without the product requirements, you don't have a clue of what it is the project is actually going to produce. So product requirements become very crucial for you to understand and for you to deliver what is expected of you as part of the project. So when we talk about the requirements of the product we're actually going to deliver, there are two major almost competing forces that have a different view of what those requirements actually are. One is the customer, and that customer, we define a customer as the individual who commissioned us to actually produce the actual product of the project for. And let me give you an example of this. Let's say, for example, we're doing a payroll system. So the customer for this would be the head of payroll or the department head of payroll, which has said, I want a new payroll system. Whereas the user would be the individuals that actually are going to be using the new payroll system. They often have different requirements. One could be simply from a customer standpoint to say, I want a new payroll system, get it in. From a user standpoint, they're looking at it, how's this going to make my job better? What's in it for me for this particular thing? So often they're in a tug of war of what the requirements is. You, as the project manager, are caught in that tug of war. And what you need to do, really, is you need to get an agreement from both of them. You need to have a common ground from which the customer and the user agree of what those requirements are going to be. If you don't get that agreement, it's going to be very difficult for you to actually produce the product and run the project in a way that meets both of their needs, because they'll be at opposite ends or opposing ends of what they actually expect the project will deliver. So it's very important to understand that there is these two areas, the customer and the user, and it's your job to basically get them to agree so that you can deliver something that's of value to both of them. Now, interesting enough is that product requirements have a very funny way of being presented. In original cases, when they start off in a business case, the dollars to produce the product requirements are usually small. They're within a range. They're within that range or acceptable range so that management will approve it. But as the project starts to unfold, it almost doubles and sometimes triples the amount of money for that as the project starts to unfold. And then ultimately it can get exponentially way more expensive. There's a really good reason for this, and a really good reason for this is simply this, is that the more people know, the more they want. So the more that the project starts to roll and talk about what it is that you're actually going to produce, the more that people can think about things, and the more that they understand of it, the more they actually want. And the more they want, the more it costs. And so this is a very common thing for a project manager to experience, even after they set the budget, as they start to roll it out and start to get people involved in what this product is all about and what the project is going to deliver, the cost can go up. So be prepared for that. So before we go rushing in and start to get things going, we want to make sure that we keep this triangle in mind, what scope, what time, what cost. When we look at our product requirements, we want to make sure that we have the appropriate amount of money and appropriate amount of time to deliver the things that the product requirement says it should be. The thing we want to make sure is that the customer users accept it, that they agree to what it's going to be. This is the end of this video. Up next is methods to determine requirements.